Welcome to Western's Indigenous Teaching and Learning series. My name is Candace Brunette-Debassige, and I'm an Indigenous Cree woman with French and Cree ancestry, originally from a place called Peetabeck First Nation. I'm also an assistant professor and teaching fellow in the Faculty of Education here at Western University. Western University is located in London, Ontario, in the Great Lakes region of Turtle Island, nestled in between the north end of Lake Erie and the southwestern side of Lake Huron, on the lands of the Anishnabek, Haudenoshaunee and Lenapewuk people. Here is where the beautiful Decolonize, also known as the Antler River, in the Ojibwe language flows, interconnecting many different places and forms of life. Acknowledging our human interconnection to this water system and all life forms that rely on it is central to an Indigenous way of knowing. So here, as always, we begin. This module is part of a series aimed at educating instructors on how to better include Indigenous perspectives into their teaching. In this first module, you will learn about the colonial roots of the Academy and knowledge, and be introduced to the need to decolonize your teaching.
Many universities around the world are grappling with their troubling imperial colonial roots. These roots and routes are tied to the movement of Europeans who traveled the world in pursuit of land and resources to bring back to Europe, the motherland. As they moved from Europe and eventually settled in places like Africa, Australia, New Zealand, and Turtle Island, the Americas, Europeans brought with them a higher educational system that was used as a tool to perpetuate Eurocentric, colonial, and racist ideologies about Indigenous peoples of the lands they came into contact with. When it comes to Indigenous peoples, the Academy has advanced many ideas that have supported European global domination, including the infamous legal concept, doctrine of discovery, also known as terra nullius, a notion that no one owned the land prior to European arrival. These academic concepts have rationalized settler dispossession of Indigenous peoples from their lands. The Westernized University, as termed by Puerto Rican scholar Ramon Grofagel, was positioned in many parts of the world as the authority of knowledge, a site of empire fueled by what Mi'kmaq scholar Marie Baptiste has coined cognitive imperialism, the taken-for-granted way in which universities position Eurocentric knowledge as superior, universal, and objective. The Westernized University created a global enterprise that has up until more recently kept invisible its geographic, political, and linguistic roots in European lands, Euro-Western knowledges, and the English language. In Canada, early universities emerged over the 19th century, starting with early universities like the University of Laval, University of Toronto, McGill University, the University of New Brunswick, and University of Western Ontario. These institutions, along with church and state, were powered by similar imperial, colonial, and civilizing missions. They worked together to remake Indigenous lands into the nation-state, then into present-day provinces, which have all served to normalize Western settler authority over Indigenous lands, thus erasing Indigenous presence. Part of this larger colonial project involved using early universities as the training grounds for assimilation by training clergy who operated in residential schools. Nearly 150 residential schools ran across Canada for nearly 150 years, aiming to assimilate almost 150,000 Indigenous children into the Canadian society. These schools were legislated by the government and delivered in partnership with various churches. Residential schools forcibly removed 7 generations of Indigenous children from their families, forcing them to abandon their so-called heathen and savage ways, an act now considered cultural genocide. Western University was part of this colonial apparatus. Huron College is the founding college of Western University, founded as an Anglican seminary in 1863 by Bishop Benjamin Cronin. Huron has been an affiliate college with Western since the beginning of the larger university, which was granted university powers under a University Act in 1878. Huron College, and as a result Western University, have been involved directly and indirectly in the residential school system. Huron College not only trained priests, but several of Huron's alumni deeply shaped Canada's residential school system. For example, Huron's first principal, Isaac Helmuth, also founded Western University. In supporting this work, Western's founder built ties with local First Nations individuals, as well as the Mohawk Institute and Shingwak Industrial Home, 2 early residential schools in Ontario. During these early years, ironically, early universities were a little more accessible for some Indigenous students than they would become in the late 19th century after Confederation and the release of the Indian Act. During these early years, a handful of Indigenous peoples, Anishnabek and Haudenoshaunee priests trained at Huron, actually pushed for Western to be built. During this time, funds were raised by Indigenous peoples with the promise that Western would educate both Indigenous and settler people. That promise was never realized, as the Indian Act, released in 1876, imposed restrictions on Indigenous peoples to access higher education. First Nations peoples, one group of the larger Indigenous population, for example, were legally barred from attending universities unless they enfranchised, gave up their rights to Indian status and land. Many Indigenous peoples refused to participate in this assimilation project. In this way, universities have long been tied with Canada's insidious goals to assimilate and erase Indigenous peoples' rights in order for settlers to acquire title of their land. Even after enfranchisement laws were long abandoned in the 1960s, the Academy and its scholars, largely white European men, continued to take up Indigenous peoples as subjects of their scholarship. Within these elitist spaces, Indigenous peoples were silent and talked about through Euro-Western male gazes. The myths told about Indigenous peoples often reduced them to other, primitive, and unintelligible, where Indigenous peoples were assumed to be incapable of intellectualizing and theorizing. The colonial myths perpetuated deficit notions, positioning Indigenous peoples as inferior to European settlers, as savage, uncivilized, and incapable of governing themselves. This Western scholarship has resulted in the dehumanizing of Indigenous peoples in the Canadian consciousness and the delegitimizing of Indigenous knowledges. Anishnabek scholar Sheila Cote-Meek asserts Indigenous knowledges were effectively debased and devalued in university education. For Indigenous peoples of Turtle Island, the colonial legacy of the Academy is not merely a theoretical discourse or concept of study. It is an embodied, violent, and ongoing experience that has a continuing intergenerational impact. As a result, Indigenous peoples continue to struggle accessing, navigating, and finding space in the higher education system and in society. It is no wonder that even still today, many Indigenous peoples carry a deep sense of distrust of the academic system. Today, Canadian universities are facing a reckoning with how the higher education system is steeped in European global domination, heteropatriarchy, and settler colonialism. The nation-state's ongoing desire to assimilate and eradicate Indigenous peoples. These complex systems of power shape contemporary university policies and procedures, disciplinary structures, and even the cultural norms that govern our everyday practices inside universities. Decolonizing movements are emerging in settler colonial contexts globally, inside and outside universities. In Canada, decolonization discourses have heightened after the release of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's 94 calls to action. The movement has involved people calling on universities to acknowledge its colonial legacy and redress the complex roots of academic colonialism. Work to restructure powers that dominate education and have denigrated non-Western ways of knowing. Decolonizing work is hotly debated and taken up in practice in diverse ways, often criticized for its performativity. Decolonizing work recognizes the historical and political nature of education, but moves beyond recognition toward action and change. As part of larger decolonial resistance movements, often led by Indigenous and racialized groups, universities are transforming and critically examining the boundaries of higher education and knowledge, and how they continue to be limited by Euro-Western assumptions that have shut out diverse peoples and knowledges. Grappling with our colonial roots should be part of our everyday praxis. This work is messy and contested, and most of all, uncomfortable, as it unsettles taken for granted truths embedded in Euro-Western ways of thinking and doing, exposes the threads of power embedded in structures within ourselves, across our relationships with each other and the land, and of course with the institution in which we all study and work.
Settler colonialism rests upon the notion that colonization is not a historical event, but an ongoing structure with a diversity across time and place, accompanying varying experiences for different groups. In Canada, settler colonialism persists and negatively impacts Indigenous peoples original to this land. It is structured in the political system of the nation-state Canada, and its ongoing legal relationship to Indigenous peoples, and the state and settlers' ongoing occupation of Indigenous lands. Dene scholar Glenn Colesart defines settler colonialism as interrelated discursive and non-discursive facets of economic, gendered, racial, and state power that have been structured into a relatively secure or sedimented set of hierarchical social relations that continue to facilitate the dispossession of Indigenous peoples from their lands and self-determining authority. Settler colonialism is not only upheld by the political system of the nation-state, it is also intertwined within larger systems of power, such as global economy, capitalism, and the human-centered hierarchical system like white supremacy and heteropatriarchy, and an epistemological system of Eurocentrism as a universalist knowledge subscribed to all people. These complex systems operate together to place humans in individual competition with each other and over non-humans and the land, reproducing various forms of ongoing violence and exploitation. Underpinning these dominant Euro-Western colonial systems are Western epistemologies, which are shaped by modernistic assumptions about knowledge that frame these ideas of a seamless progress, industrialization, democracy, secularization, humanism, linear time, scientific objective reasoning, and nation states. These assumptions seek to compartmentalize knowledge, breaking it down into disciplinary categories and promoting knowledge as an individualist endeavor-making process individually claimable, measurable, predictable, generalizable, and manageable. Underlying these logics around knowledge are ideas that humans are at the center of all knowing, and most importantly, elements of truth are universal and can be applied to all people and contexts. All of these logics within Euro-Western epistemological systems have served to undermine and delegitimize Indigenous and non-Western ways of knowing, being, and doing. Indigenous Cree scholar Willie Ermine has offered a concept of an ethical space of engagement as a necessary disposition for Indigenous peoples and Western societies to come together into dialogue with each other. In this process of engagement, Western ways of thinking must be suspended in order for Indigenous knowledges to come into view. The Westernized university is dramatically shaped by colonialism, and it has privileged Euro-Western epistemological assumptions. These philosophical and power differences mark the curriculum and exchange processes, as well as many people's abilities to understand and hear each other. Therefore, as educators, we must prepare ourselves, interrogate our own colonial assumptions and biases about knowledge, and actively foster ethical spaces of engagement for ourselves and learners to do the same. Before educators can facilitate these ethical spaces of engagement, we must first understand and accept that fundamental paradigmatic differences exist between Western and non-Western knowledges. To do so, it is really helpful to unpack the word epistemology, which is commonly understood as the nature of coming to know. According to Soto Plains Cree scholar Margaret Kovach, epistemologies are underlying beliefs about knowledge, where it comes from, and who it involves. Batu scholar Bagel Chilisa similarly states that epistemology asks questions such as, what are the sources of knowledge? How reliable are the sources? What can one know? And how does one know it is true? Many Indigenous scholars assert that there are fundamental epistemological differences between Western and Indigenous knowledges. These differences shape the Westernized university and how different knowledges have been privileged, classified, defined, produced, disseminated in the academy. Historically, Euro-Western epistemologies have limited, denied, and denigrated marginalized Indigenous knowledges. As a result, relatively little is known about Indigenous knowledges in most universities. Instead, Indigenous ways of knowing, being, and doing have often been viewed through a Euro-Western colonial lens, where Indigenous knowledges have been pathologized and positioned as inferior, in deficit to Euro-Western paradigms. Indigenous knowledges have been over time appropriated, taken out of context, categorized, labeled, and misinterpreted by Western scholars, and positioned back to the West as truth. Through the colonial encounter, Indigenous peoples have been studied by the West and have been marked as primitive, unintelligible, and their knowledges have been reduced to simple culture, folklore, or mythology. By reinforcing this cognitive imperialism, universities have contributed to perpetuating these colonial myths about Indigenous peoples and Indigenous knowledges. Despite these attempts to silence Indigenous peoples and ways of knowing in universities, Indigenous peoples are taking back their authorial voices and rights to produce knowledge in academic spaces. Many Indigenous scholars argue that they have never stopped creating knowledge, but they were denied this right in the academy. As part of the decolonial movement, Indigenous communities are affirming that Indigenous epistemologies have always existed and are unique from the Euro-Western paradigm. While this overarching paradigmatic difference exists, Like Western epistemologies, there is a diversity within Indigenous epistemologies, embodied through the multitude of Indigenous languages, cultures, places from which Indigenous knowledge originates. Indigenous epistemologies span a diversity of groups, languages, and place-based contexts, but collectively they form a common epistemic stance. These Indigenous epistemologies share commonalities, including a relational ontology that understands knowledge as emerging from subjective, interpretive interrelationships with all life forms, including humans and non-humans, the land, and cosmos. In close connection with the land that is viewed as kin, as a relative, Indigenous knowledges become enlivened through experiencing and learning as a dynamic and continuously adaptive orientation occurring in relation. In this sense, Indigenous knowledges are always in flux and constantly shifting with time and space. Holistically embodied, engaging the body, mind, and spirit. In this way, knowledge is tied to subjective and direct experiences in relation to a collective that is animated by a metaphysical force of spirituality, as well as the role of oracy and storytelling in both understanding and expressing Indigenous knowledge. As such, Indigenous knowledges are often held collectively. They're stored in people's memories and activated in practice, generated and maintained over generations, particularly through the vital role that Indigenous knowledge holders play in maintaining and passing on Indigenous knowledges from generation to generation. This upholds the integrity and process of coming to know. In the movement to decolonize the academy happening across Canadian universities, there are three common concepts used often interchangeably. While these concepts are interrelated, it's important to understand the differences in some debates. The three concepts are decolonization, indigenization, and reconciliation. I will begin with the concept reconciliation, which first emerged in Canada as part of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's 94 Calls to Action, released in 2015. Truth and reconciliation processes are part of a larger global movement, where governments in different countries, such as South Africa, New Zealand, Australia, and now Canada, have turned to the Commission process to redress harms done to Indigenous peoples. In Canada, the TRC began its work in 2008, gathering the stories of Indigenous survivors forced to attend Indian residential schools. The Commission resulted in 94 calls to action to redress harm covering a wide range of public institutions, including education, health, media, and law. Since 2015, the TRC has become a national movement with the purpose to educate the public and tell Indigenous peoples' truths, which have been historically silenced by governments. According to Métis scholar Adam Gaudry and settler Canadian scholar Danielle Lorenz, reconciliation discourses have increased dramatically post-TRC and shifted many of the conversations happening on Canadian university campuses, resulting in a number of changes, including increasing efforts to include Indigenous content in the curriculum, hire more Indigenous faculty members who are chronically underrepresented, and invest in training and development of university employees. At the same time, many Indigenous peoples and universities have argued that reconciliation discourses have become somewhat performative and have not necessarily led to the transformative changes that benefit Indigenous peoples. Moreover, many Indigenous scholars argue that it's impossible to reconcile until the Indian Act legislation and other legal relationships that undermine Indigenous nationhood are dealt with. Decolonization is another concept widely used in the movement. Decolonization emerges out of critical theory and praxis as a way of deconstructing the ways that colonial thinking structures and shapes education, knowledge, and research. Maori scholar Linda Tuhaioe-Smith's groundbreaking scholarship, originally released in 1999, entitled Decolonizing Methodologies, provides important context for uncovering the devastating impacts that Western research has had on Indigenous peoples around the world. Mi'kmaq scholar Marie Battiste's work also articulates decolonization as necessary to undoing the Eurocentric nature of the academy and addressing the prevalence of cognitive imperialism. Batiste defines cognitive imperialism as the taken-for-granted way in which universities privilege Euro-Western knowledges, ideologies, norms, and values as not only universal but superior to other knowledges. In 2021, an Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion advisory group for the Federation of Humanities and Social Sciences added the D to EDI for decolonization to foreground the need to unsettle the impacts of colonial histories, ideologies, experiences, and legacies on our disciplines, archives, canons, curricula, structures of governance, institutional design, and cultures, symbols, and ceremonies in our education system. The EDID advisory group argues that decolonization is a necessary and ongoing process of unlearning, uncovering, and transforming legacies of colonialism in education and knowledge, and relearning and rebuilding the social, cultural, and linguistic foundations that were lost or eroded through colonialism. Last but not least, indigenization is the final concept. Considering that Indigenous knowledges have been ignored by and othered in the academy, and Indigenous peoples have been subjected to Western authorial gazes, indigenization involves placing Indigenous peoples in authoring positions and privileging Indigenous knowledge. Indigenization calls for naturalizing Indigenous ways of knowing as legitimate, a form of knowledge and an epistemic paradigm. Some scholars have argued, however, due to the enduring nature of settler colonialism and Eurocentrism in our education system, we must begin first by decolonizing our thinking, unsettling colonial assumptions and biases in order to accept that Indigenous peoples have knowledge that's grounded in our own paradigm. While this process recognizes that an Indigenous paradigm exists, it also recognizes that there is a diversity of Indigenous knowledges connected to different Indigenous nations, languages, and lands. Indigenizing the curriculum also needs to be led and determined by Indigenous peoples and communities, respecting the intellectual sovereignty and the rights of Indigenous peoples to be self-determining. This includes the right to produce and disseminate Indigenous knowledges, languages, theories, and methodologies in our education system. In light of calls to transform Westernized universities, Lenape Potawatomi education scholar Dr. Susan Dion, in her book Braiding Histories, calls on educators to move beyond the position of the perfect stranger. The perfect stranger, she argues, is a convenient and apolitical position that has rationalized educators in not acting based on not knowing enough and thus not being capable of teaching Indigenous content. This attitude, Dion argues, is convenient and obfuscates instructors from taking responsibility for teaching about Indigenous historical colonial experiences and contemporary realities across disciplines. Moreover, this refrain is based in fear and anxiety. In the next module, we will start to introduce instructors to 4 guiding principles that move beyond the perfect stranger. Rather than turn away from taking action through our teaching, we will invite instructors to assess their knowledge and readiness while acknowledging any fear and resistance so that we may take together transformative action. Miigwech, Yawagoa, Anushik, thank you for joining us in the Indigenous Teaching and Learning Series, Module 1.
We are the world that's forgotten. We stand